This is Dr. Carroll, and this video is about the assert operator. So you've worked hard, you've written a program, it's ready to go, you're pretty sure everything is right, but you want to make sure, and you'd like to know that all of your assumptions also they change in the future, that they don't hold anymore. You'd like to know that, have some mechanism to be able to control that. So you can use the built-in assert operator to be able to do that. There's no import statements required. So let's talk about how do they work. Well, an insert statement is assumed to be true. It's assumed to be true. And if not, it throws an exception, which means it stops execution. And so let's talk about the syntax, because that'll help us understand it better. So the syntax is assert, and then we give it some test expression. And that's the simple form. We also have a slightly more verbose form where we have assert and the test expression, but then we also have this failure message, which is preceded by a colon. So let's step through each part of these. Assert is a keyword, as is suggested by the font coloring. And then test expression must evaluate to a Boolean, meaning true or false. And then if it's false, then an exception is thrown. The failure message, which is optional as suggested by the two forms of syntax there, is based on, this failure message is passed to the assertion error exception. And in the Oracle documentation, it says the message should allow you to diagnose and ultimately fix the error that led to the assertion failure. So if you're like me, let's see an example. Okay, and I've got two here. The first one is a very simple example that's not really how you'd use assertion statements, but it illustrates the point to help understand them. So let's say we have an integer age, it's assigned to 11, we do some other code, and later on we want to assert that the age is at least 13 years old. You could think of some social media requirement that you want to verify that the age is at least 13 years old. And so, and if it fails, that we are going to display too young. And then, because we're about to create an account, and we just want to assert that is correct, that age is at least 13. And so if it's not, then what we'd like to do is have it stop because something's wrong, our assumptions are wrong, we should have fixed it. It is a super simple example. You wouldn't actually do this in practice because it's probably dependent on user input, but maybe we're inferring the age, I don't know, but a super simple example. And then we'll see it in execution in just a minute. So let's see a more complete example that I would expect you to write in code. Let's say we had some tax calculator class, and we're calling the constructor, we're creating a new one here, and we're assigning it to the object reference tax object. And we have income of almost $10,000, and so we're saying the tax that is expected is $1,000 on this income based on the income taxes I just made up. And so we have this tax object, and we can say, hey, get tax based on this income, and then this is the tax that is calculated. So the question is because we know the answer, we're testing here, is the tax expected, is that going to equal the tax calculated? And we're going to assert that it is, so we're assuming that it is. We're saying the tax collected equals the tax expected. And let's help it out here. So here's our test expression, okay? So here's our Boolean, that these are equal. We're asserting that that's true. And if it fails, then let's display this verbose message here. The assert failed for get tax, and we're even specifying exactly what the income is, because you can imagine we have multiple tests that we're running. And we'll even display here what the tax that was collected, calculated, and the tax that was expected. Okay, and then that makes up our failure message, but it's a little hard to see with there. Does that help? Okay, so if you've got a good enough screen then. All right, so now that we've talked about what they are, how to write them, let's talk about how to enable them. So there's two main reasons, because one, the assertions can be computationally expensive. For example, if you're trying to assert that the minimum value of that we've found the minimum value in a very long list, a very long array, that can be computationally intensive. Additionally, assertion statements weren't introduced until the JDK version 1.4, and so in earlier code you could legally have variables that were assert and other things like that. So we need to tell the JVM, we need to tell the Java virtual machine to enable assert statements when we're running the bytecode. So we do it when we're running Java and not when we're compiling. Not compiling, but when we're interpreting. So when we run Java, we pass it the EA flag, enable assertions, and then we pass it the class name. No extension, just class name. So for example, if we were compiling a file called taxcollector.java, we'd compile that, and then we'd have just java-ea and then tax collector. So there's also another form we can use, so Java, and we can do enable assertions and spell it out here so that it makes it more clear what's going on. So we need to enable them. So let's see a demo. So I've already compiled this, and so let's run it. Oh, let me show you what we're running here. Is this super simple example I showed before, just super simple so that we can focus on what's going on. So age is 11, and then we're asserting that age is greater than 13, and this is to throw a certain exception. But when we compile it, it says account created and age is 11. What's going on here? Well, we did not enable we didn't enable exceptions, assertions, and so here, once we've enabled them, sure enough, said, hey, there's an exception in thread main, and it's of assertion error type, and the message is too young. See how this corresponds right here? So the exception was thrown, and this is the message of it, and it'll tell you right where it was, line 10, which is right here, and it tells you the file, which is very helpful when you have a very large program. And so there's a simple little demo to illustrate that. So, so a very important thing to remember is that about assertions is they can be disabled, and they are disabled by default. So we should never assume that they will be executed. Don't put code that you're depending on to execute in an assertion statement. They should only be additive. They should only be extra to verify assumptions and things. So let's talk about when to use them and when not to use them. First, let's talk about when to use them. So it's appropriate to use assertion statements to verify that verify that code is truly that unreachable code is truly that it is unreachable. And in general, it's to verify other assumptions as well. We can also verify as arguments passed to private methods, but not public, just private methods. Hey, I'm expecting these are the conditions, and so let me verify that. So those are good times when to use assertion statements. Let's talk about when not to use assertion statements. So in place of error messages, just go ahead and do normal error messages. And then to verify arguments to public methods. Now I stipulate this because the user could, the input could be coming from the user, and so it'd be more appropriate to use error handling for this sort of situation. That's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it.